In early 1945, the American heartland was a fortress, an ocean away from the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific. For the average citizen, the war was a distant thunder, a headline in the paper, a voice on the radio. The continental United States was believed to be untouchable, sacrosanct. But then the silent visitors began to arrive. In Thermopolis, Wyoming, a local man discovered a large deflated paper object tangled in a power line, its strange apparatus sparking and sputtering. In Medford, Oregon, a woodcutter stumbled upon a crater in the forest, surrounded by metallic fragments and shreds of what looked like rice paper. Near Holyoke, Colorado, a farmhand watched a silvery sphere descend from the overcast sky, only to vanish behind a ridge, followed by the dull crump of an explosion. These were not isolated incidents. From the Aleutian Islands to Michigan, hundreds of similar reports trickled in to baffled local authorities. There was no sound of an engine, no wreckage of an aircraft, no warning. The enemy, it seemed, had found a way to bridge 6,000 miles of ocean, to fly over the world's most powerful air defenses, and to deliver death from a silent, empty sky. The United States military faced an impossible problem. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see, cannot hear, and cannot find? An enemy that rides the very wind itself. This is the story of that silent weapon, a weapon born of desperation, ingenuity, and a profound understanding of the planet's hidden forces. It was a machine of paper and string, powered by the sun and the Earth's rotation, designed to carry fire and terror to a nation that believed itself immune. This is the story of Operation Fugo, the Japanese intercontinental balloon offensive. To understand the birth of the Fugo, we must return to April 18, 1942. On that day, 16 American B-25 Mitchell bombers, launched from the deck of the USS Hornet, roared over Tokyo and other Japanese cities. The Doolittle Raid, in military terms, was a minor success. The physical damage was negligible, but psychologically it was a catastrophe for the Japanese Empire. It shattered the sacred myth of an invulnerable homeland. It was a profound humiliation for a military leadership that had promised its people that the war would never touch their shores. In the wake of this shock, the Imperial Japanese Army's high command became consumed by a single burning objective: retaliation. They had to strike the American mainland. The strategic challenge was immense, a problem of simple, brutal geography. The Pacific Ocean was a vast, unforgiving moat. Conventional bombers lacked the range to cross it and return. An aircraft carrier strike force like the one that had attacked Pearl Harbor would be a suicide mission, sailing into the teeth of the now mobilized and vengeful U.S. Navy. Sabotage by submarine-landed agents was an option, and was attempted, but it lacked the grand psychological impact the Army desired. They had already launched a small seaplane from a submarine to drop incendiary bombs on the forests of Oregon in September 1942. The attack started a few small fires, quickly extinguished. It was a pinprick, not the hammer blow they envisioned. What they needed was a new way of war, a weapon that required no pilot, no ship, no airfield within thousands of miles of the target. They needed a ghost weapon. The answer would not come from an armory or an aircraft factory, but from a quiet laboratory. The 9th Army Technical Research Laboratory, under the command of Major General Tsuyoshi Kasaba, had been tasked with developing unconventional weapons. Within its walls, men like lead technical engineer Teiji Takada were not looking at engines or airframes, they were looking at the sky. For years, Japanese meteorologists had been launching high-altitude balloons to gather weather data. In doing so, they had discovered something extraordinary, a phenomenon of immense power that was at the time largely unknown to the rest of the world. They had discovered a river in the sky. This was the jet stream, a narrow, fast-flowing current of air meandering at altitudes between 30 and 40,000 feet. In the winter months, this atmospheric river accelerated, reaching speeds of over 200 miles per hour, flowing in a consistent, predictable path from the coast of Japan directly to the west coast of North America. General Kasaba and his engineers had a moment of profound realization. The Pacific was not an obstacle, it was a conveyance. If they could design a craft to ride this celestial current, they could cross the ocean in as little as 3 days. The wind itself, what they called the kamikaze, or divine wind, would be their engine. The concept of the Fugo weapon, the fire balloon, was born. But the concept was one thing, the engineering was another. The problem was not simply launching a balloon. The physics of it presented a near impossible challenge. A standard balloon filled with lifting gas would rise into the sky, As the sun's rays heated the gas, it would expand. To prevent the balloon from bursting, it would have to vent the excess gas. The balloon would continue to rise, perhaps into the jet stream, but then night would fall. The gas would cool and contract. The balloon would lose lift and begin to descend. It would fall out of the jet stream and into the cold waters of the Pacific, thousands of miles short of its target. The engineers of the 9th Lab needed to invent a brain for their balloon, an automatic pilot made of nothing more than string, sand, and the laws of physics. Their solution was a work of crude genius. At the heart of the system was a control unit, a cast aluminum wheel about 2 feet in diameter, from which the entire payload was suspended. Around the circumference of this wheel, they attached 32 sandbags, each weighing approximately 5 pounds. These were the balloon's fuel. They also attached a series of small, precisely calibrated explosive charges. This entire apparatus was wired to a bank of 3 sensitive aneroid barometers. This was the balloon's brain. Here is how it worked. The balloon would be launched ascending towards the jet stream. The engineers set the barometers with a floor and a ceiling, 30,000 and 38,000 feet. If the balloon, during its nightly cooling, began to sink and descended below 30,000 feet, the first barometer would close an electrical circuit. This would fire one of the small explosive charges, which would sever the connection for one of the sandbags. The 5-pound weight would drop away. The balloon, now lighter, would cease its descent and begin to rise again, back into the fast-moving core of the jet stream. This process would repeat itself throughout the 3-day journey, each dropped sandbag buying the balloon more time in the air. Conversely, if the balloon, heated by the daytime sun, rose above 38,000 feet, the second barometer would trigger a valve at the top of the gas bag, venting a controlled amount of hydrogen. This would reduce its lift, causing it to descend back into the designated altitude corridor. It was a delicate, self-regulating ballet, an airborne automaton cycling up and down, always staying within the embrace of the jet stream. For 3 days and 6,000 miles it would perform this dance across the Pacific. The balloon itself was a testament to the scale and desperation of the project. It was enormous, a sphere 33 feet in diameter, with a total volume of 19,000 cubic feet. It was not made of rubber or canvas but of paper, specifically Washi *, a traditional Japanese paper made from the fibers of the mulberry bush. It was incredibly lightweight yet remarkably strong and gas impermeable. To construct a single balloon, hundreds of small panels of washi had to be meticulously glued together. The task was so immense that the military outsourced it. Across Japan, in sumo wrestling halls, theaters, and school gymnasiums, thousands of schoolgirls and conscripted laborers were put to work, patiently laminating and gluing the paper panels. The glue itself was a concoction made from a vegetable paste called konnyaku * or devil's tongue. It was a nationwide cottage industry of weaponized origami. The lifting gas was not the safe, inert helium used by the Americans for their blimps. Japan, lacking access to natural helium reserves, was forced to use hydrogen. It was far more efficient as a lifting gas, but it was also spectacularly flammable and explosive. Every launch would be a dance with potential disaster. And then there was the payload. After the balloon had dropped its final sandbag, a process that the engineers calculated would happen over the North American continent, the same automatic system would begin to release the bombs. The typical Fugo carried a lethal cargo. The primary weapon was a 15-kilogram or 33-pound Type 97 high-explosive anti-personnel fragmentation bomb. This was accompanied by 4 smaller 5-kilogram or 12-pound incendiary devices. The strategic goal was not precision bombing, it was chaos. The Japanese High Command fed romanticized reports of the American wilderness from movies like Gone with the Wind, envisioned a dry, combustible landscape. They believed that thousands of these incendiary bombs, dropped into the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest, would trigger firestorms of apocalyptic scale. These fires, they theorized, would not only destroy timber and resources, but would also draw manpower away from war industries, and most importantly induce widespread panic among the American populace. As a final sinister touch, the control apparatus was fitted with a self-destruct mechanism. After the last bomb was dropped, a final flash powder charge was designed to ignite. This would destroy the delicate barometer rig and ideally set fire to the hydrogen-filled balloon, incinerating the evidence and leaving investigators on the ground with nothing but a few mysterious fragments. This was the Fugo weapon: a paper globe, a bag of sand, a few small bombs, and one of the most ingenious automatic control systems of the Second World War. The launches began in earnest in November of 1944. from 3 primary sites on the eastern coast of Honshu, including a beach at Ichinomiya. Specialized balloon troops prepared for their strange battle. The work was difficult and dangerous. In the pre-dawn darkness, teams of men would wrestle with the enormous rustling envelopes of paper as they were filled with volatile hydrogen. The slightest gust of wind could send the massive sphere careening into a building or a tree, tearing the delicate paper. A single spark could turn the entire operation into a ball of fire, but they persisted. Unit by unit, the silent weapons were released. They rose gracefully into the winter sky, catching the invisible current, and began their lonely 3-day odyssey eastward. The Japanese military would ultimately launch over 9,300 of these silent invaders. They had aimed their weapon. Now they could only wait, listening for the echoes of the chaos they hoped to sow. In Washington, D.C., the echoes they were hearing were of confusion. The first confirmed Fugo was discovered on November 4, 1944, by the U.S. Navy patrol boat CPC-817, which recovered a partial balloon from the water off San Pedro, California. More reports followed: a rancher in Montana, a lumberjack in British Columbia, an explosion in a field in Northern California. Initially, the fragments were dismissed as weather balloons or experimental devices, but as more and more reports came in, a pattern began to emerge. The debris was consistent: rice paper, strange ropes, metal fittings with Japanese markings, and sometimes unexploded ordnance. The 4th Air Force, responsible for the defense of the West Coast, was scrambled. But what were they supposed to be looking for? The balloons were invisible to the radar of the era. They were too small, made of non-reflective materials, and flew at altitudes that were at the very edge of the service ceiling for most fighter planes. They made no sound. They left no exhaust trail. It was a ghost hunt. At the same time, another, more subtle war was being waged. The United States Office of Censorship, under Director Byron Price, made a critical calculation. They realized that the Japanese had no way of knowing if their balloons were reaching America, or what effect they were having. The weapon's primary purpose was psychological. Therefore, the most powerful countermeasure was silence. A request which amounted to a demand went out to every newspaper and radio station in the country. Under the voluntary censorship code, all reporting on mysterious balloons, unexplained explosions, or fires of unknown origin was strictly forbidden. The media blackout was near total. The goal was simple: to blind the enemy. If the Japanese planners in Tokyo heard nothing but silence from America, they would assume their ambitious program was a failure. While the press was muzzled, a massive and secret investigation was underway. The FBI, along with Army and Navy intelligence, created the Japanese Balloon Project. Every scrap of debris from every incident site was collected, catalogued, and sent to the Naval Technical Air Intelligence Center in Anacostia, D.C. The engineers and analysts were dumbfounded by the elegance of the altitude control mechanism. They dissected the barometers, the batteries, the explosive bolts. They reverse-engineered the entire system, marveling at its low-tech brilliance. But the most crucial clue came not from a piece of machinery, but from a bag of sand. The sand from the ballast bags was sent to the military geology unit of the U.S. Geological Survey. This was a team of scientific detectives. Under a microscope, the sand told a story. The geologists analyzed the specific density of the minerals, the grain size, and the composition. Most importantly, they examined the microscopic fossils mixed in with the sand, the shells of tiny single-celled organisms called diatoms. Different species of diatoms live in different parts of the world. By identifying the unique combination of minerals and fossilized life, the geologists were able to rule out an American origin. This was not sand from any beach in North or South America. They cross-referenced their findings with geological surveys of the Japanese coastline. They narrowed it down. The sand contained species of diatoms and a mineral composition unique to 2 specific locations on Earth. One was the Great Beach at Ichinomiya, on Japan's main island of Honshu. The geologists had found the launch sites. The mystery of the balloon's origin was solved. Now they had to be stopped in the air. This led to the creation of Project Lightning. The Army Air Forces assigned its most capable aircraft to the hunt, the P-38 Lightning and the P-61 Black Widow night fighter. The task given to the pilots was Sisyphean. They were to fly search patterns at extreme altitudes, 30 to 40,000 feet, scanning the vast emptiness of the sky for a 33-foot paper sphere. The cockpits were unpressurized and freezing cold. The pilots flew on oxygen, their breath crystallizing on their masks. Even if they found one, shooting it down was another matter. A balloon is not like an airplane. It has no engine to disable. no fuel tanks to ignite in a satisfying explosion, no control surfaces to shred. It's mostly empty space. Pilots reported firing entire belts of .50 caliber machine gun ammunition through the paper envelopes, with the bullets passing harmlessly through. The balloon would just drift on, slowly leaking hydrogen, taking hours to descend. The only way to guarantee a kill was to hit the small payload assembly or to ignite the hydrogen gas. On March 23, 1945, First Lieutenant James H. Find of the 566th Army Air Forces Base Unit, flying a P-38J, had one of the few confirmed victories. Over an area of eastern Washington, he spotted a Fugo. Closing in, he had to carefully throttle his engines to match the slow drift of the balloon. He fired a burst which had no effect. He fired another. On his third pass, his traces finally found their mark, igniting the hydrogen. The balloon vanished in a brilliant white flash, the concussion rocking his aircraft. Over the entire course of the offensive, of the more than 9,000 balloons launched, American interceptors would officially confirm shooting down fewer than 20. The silent wind was proving to be an elusive foe. The American counter-offensive, however, was not limited to the skies over the homeland. The intelligence gleaned from the geologist's sand analysis was passed to the 21st Bomber Command, operating the new B-29 superfortresses from the Marianas Islands. The launch sites at Ichinomiya and elsewhere, along with the factories producing the hydrogen and the paper envelopes, were added to the B-29 target lists. The full weight of American industrial might was now being brought to bear, not just on Japan's cities and military bases, but on the small workshops and chemical plants that were the source of the balloon weapon. For the American public, the entire affair remained a ghost story, a rumor whispered by those who had seen something strange. The censorship held, but on May 5, 1945, the silent war came to a tragic and public end. In a wooded area near Gearhart, Oregon, a local minister, Archie Mitchell, and his pregnant wife, Elsie, were out for a church picnic with 5 children from their congregation. While Archie was parking the car, Elsie and the children discovered one of the Japanese balloons. Its strange white shape snagged in the trees. It had landed, but its deadly payload was still armed. Unaware of the danger, one or more of the children apparently tugged at the device. The 33-pound high-explosive bomb detonated. Elsie Mitchell and all 5 children were killed instantly. They were and remain the only people to die as a result of enemy action on the continental United States during World War II. The tragedy forced the government's hand. The Office of Censorship lifted the blackout, and public warnings were issued across the western states, urging citizens not to touch any strange objects they might find. The secret was out. But by then the Fugo offensive was already sputtering to its end. The Japanese planners, deprived of any intelligence about their weapon's success due to the American media blackout, were operating in a vacuum. They had no idea that hundreds of their balloons had in fact completed the journey. From their perspective, the program was a costly failure. Furthermore, the strategic situation had grown dire. P-29 raids were now incinerating Japan's industrial capacity. The very plants needed to produce the hydrogen for the balloons were being systematically destroyed. Resources were scarce, and the fantastical balloon project was deemed a luxury Japan could no longer afford. In April 1945, even before the tragedy in Oregon, the Imperial Army officially cancelled Operation Fugo. The last silent visitors had already been launched. In the final accounting, was the Fugo weapon a success or a failure? From a purely military and strategic perspective, it was a failure. The grand vision of continent-spanning firestorms never materialized. The launches were conducted during the winter when the Pacific Northwest is one of tampering with one. A short circuit at a power substation in Hanford, Washington, which briefly took the production reactor for the Manhattan Project offline, a fact the Japanese would never know. Its direct impact on the American war effort was, in a word, zero. Yet, to dismiss it as a failure is to miss the point. As a feat of engineering, it was a triumph of desperate asymmetric thinking. The Japanese military, facing an insurmountable technological and industrial gap, had created an intercontinental weapon out of paper, sand, and an understanding of the planet's meteorology. They had successfully attacked the American homeland from 6,000 miles away, bypassing the most powerful Navy and Air Force on Earth. The balloon's automatic altitude control system was a masterpiece of analog computation, a robot that navigated by the laws of physics. The legacy of the Fugo weapon is threefold. First, it was a crucial, if unintentional, contributor to the science of meteorology. The frantic American effort to understand and track the balloons dramatically accelerated the study of the jet stream. This knowledge, born of war, would directly inform the development of post-war trans-Pacific commercial aviation, making flights faster and more fuel-efficient. Second, it was a chilling proof of concept. It was the world's first intercontinental weapon system. The idea of delivering a payload across an ocean without a pilot or a conventional delivery vehicle was no longer theoretical. Japanese planners had even considered, and thankfully rejected, equipping the balloons with biological agents such as anthrax or plague. In its own crude paper and string way, the Fugo was a direct conceptual ancestor to the intercontinental ballistic missile. It demonstrated that no nation, no matter how protected by oceans, was truly beyond reach. Finally, the silent wind of Operation Fugo serves as a stark reminder of the strange and forgotten corners of the Second World War. It is a story of ingenuity and desperation, of scientific detective work and profound tragedy. It is the story of a weapon that was at once a work of genius and a strategic folly, a silent ghost that haunted the skies of the American West, a chilling whisper of a new and more terrifying age of warfare to come. And that concludes this story about the Silent Wind, Japan's intercontinental balloon offensive. If you want to learn more about World War II, subscribe, like, and share. Also, leave your anecdotes and ideas in the comment section.